at the National Press Club in Canberra, Fiona Simson with a plan to get Australia growing once more. The National Farmers Federation President outlines how agriculture could supercharge Australia's economic recovery from COVID-19. That's Fiona Simson at the National Press Club.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia and today's Westpac address. My name is Sabra Lane. I am the club's president. I'm also the presenter of the ABC radio program AM. Our guest today is the president of the National Farmers Federation, Fiona Simson. If you're following the conversation online, you'll find us at Twitter. Our user handle is @PressClub, AUST. I'd like to acknowledge in the audience today the Lucy Barber, the new president at the National Rural Press Association. Congratulations. And the patron of the club is Fiona Simson. Welcome. And I would like you now to address the club on your plans for growing Australia. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Well, as somebody who normally spends a large amount of time on planes, in airport lounges and on the road, it's quite unusual for me to tell you that this is my first real trip away from home, from my farm near Prima on the Liverpool Plains in New South Wales in just about 4 months. Whilst I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't actually enjoyed the opportunity to work from home, it's also wonderful to be here to deliver this really important address in person. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, pay my respects to their elders past, present and future, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live, the Gomlaroi of the Liverpool Plains in New South Wales. We're very lucky in the Liverpool Plains that the agricultural community and the traditional owners of the land have built and forged a very strong relationship built on mutual respect. I'd also like to acknowledge National Press Club President Sabra Lane, National Press Club directors who are with us today, CEO Maurice Riley, my own CEO Tony Marr, and ladies and gentlemen. The last time I stood at this lectern was in August 2018, and I think it's fair to say that back then there was a degree of positivity in the air. NFF was about to launch our bold vision for agriculture's long-term growth. It was a plan, and it is a plan, for the sector to become Australia's next $100 billion industry. Our plan, the 2030 roadmap and the priorities within it earned the support of the Prime Minister, the government, the opposition, farmers, stakeholders and industry. If only, though, we'd had a crystal ball to see what was ahead of us. Unprecedented drought, the worst in living memory. Devastating floods in northern Queensland. And then a summer of bushfires, the horror of which will be etched in the memory of all Australians for an absolute lifetime. Many have described the events as biblical, and there were in fact even locust plagues in Western New South Wales and Queensland. Who could have predicted what would have come after that? Almost in sync with the beginning of what were for many drought-breaking rains across Australia came COVID-19. A global health pandemic with repercussions so deep that we're yet to fully understand their true impact and, of course, are deep in dealing with it still today. In the very early days of the nation's response, agriculture and its supply chain were deemed an essential service. The NFF and our members, by working with government and through the National Cabinet, ensured that abattoirs, sale yards, wool auctions, shearing sheds, packing plants all remained in operation. The federal government agreed to extend the visas of foreign workers already in the country, and the movement of agricultural transport across state borders was permitted. The urgency with which these measures were put in place to shield agriculture from the COVID shutdown demonstrated the value of our industry to Australians and to Australia. It was one of the many positive outcomes of National Cabinet and an example of what can be achieved when the states and the Commonwealth work together in a bona fide collegiate and collaborative manner. There was recognition from the Prime Minister down of the importance of food and fibre production to our nation's economy. With so many industries brought to their knees, tourism, hospitality and retail, for example, agriculture was one industry that must and did keep on keeping on. Today we're emerging from the challenges of drought, floods and bushfires, poised for growth. It's always fraught to say that agriculture overall is doing well, because across this vast brown land there remain areas that are challenged by drought. Parts of central Queensland, South Australia's pastoral regions and just south of here the Monero, I know, remain desperately dry. Parts of the Western Australia wheat belt are still waiting for adequate opening rains. Of course, many businesses have suffered serious hits to their bottom lines and will take a long time to recover. But in many regions, like my own, winter crops are emerging vigorously, and sheep and cattle once again have their heads down in plentiful pastures. Compared to where we were in January, I think most would say that we are, as an industry, in much better shape. The situation in Victoria, of course, remains worrying, and a shout out especially today to my colleagues David Jahinki and Emma Germano down there in Victoria, and all the farmers in Victoria who are certainly right in the midst again of dealing with this pandemic today. But as we dare to contemplate better times, agriculture is ready to put the foot down and accelerate a return to the economic prosperity that we as Australians have become so accustomed to. Agriculture's $100 billion vision is now not only fundamental to the improved fortunes of farmers, but it is the heart of Australia's recovery. The goal for 2030 remains, but we simply can't wait that long. The plan for agriculture's growth that I outlined here in 2018 has taken on a monumental new level of importance and urgency. The NFF has put the microscope over our priorities and identified the policy levers, the investments and innovations which will deliver the highest impact, not just for agriculture, but for the country as a whole. Put simply, when farmers do well, Australia does well. These priorities are outlined in NFF's Get Australia Growing plan that I launch here today, and I think everybody in the room has a copy. The key point here is that while many of these ideas are not new, they are achievable, and they're definitely and will genuinely stimulate new activity and new employment in our sector. Any smart government plan to grow the economy has to address these priorities, and if ever there was an impetus to supercharge agriculture and regional Australia's growth, it's absolutely now. At the heart of any plan for growth needs to be our people and our communities. Like so many Australians, COVID-19 rendered me homebound and opened my eyes to a new way of working and doing TV interviews from my home office, from the kitchen bench and from my veranda. So many Australians have had a peek into my house over the last few months. The wonders of technologies like Zoom, a reliable internet connection and a good set of headphones has demonstrated that business really can be done from almost anywhere, and for many has put that dream of a tree change absolutely in reach. More and more families and businesses can attest to the financial and lifestyle benefits of regional living, especially as our capital cities become less attractive due to congestion and costs of living. Businesses like Pointer Remote Rolls, based near Wagga, founded by AgriFuture's Rural Woman of the Year, Jo Palmer. Jo matches country-based professionals with work-from-home roles. And who can forget the juggernaut Buy from the Bush campaign, delivering straight to our Instagram feed savvy businesses, many of whom, I have to say, run by women, all with their heart and base in rural Australia. According to the Regional Australia Institute, the latest census in 2016 found that the bush attracted 65,204 more people than it lost to our capital cities. Between 2011 and 16, more than 1.2 million people either moved to regional Australia or they moved around regional Australia. We mustn't squander this momentum to go much further on Australia's regionalisation journey. For too long, regional Australians have been victim of empty promises and a lack of long-term commitment from governments at all levels. there remains a strategy vacuum around the public and private investment needed to really get our regions humming. The NFF backs the intent behind the federal government's Regional Deals program as the platform to do just this. In fact, back here on this platform in 2018, I actually celebrated its announcement. But to date, I have to say the program has been disappointing. When done right, regional deals should be the overarching framework to align Commonwealth, state-based regional development programs and local government initiatives. Together, the three levels of government working together, guiding policies and investments for transport, manufacturing, telecommunications, energy generation, including renewables, education, labour, health, cultural and Indigenous and social amenities, all the stuff that regions, vibrant regions, are made of. Capitalising on environmental and infrastructure advantages, communities must be included in identifying new and nurturing already established industries. And crucially, we must not be blinkered by jurisdictional boundaries. Best results will be achieved when investments are guided by synergies and opportunities for scale. Like the Canberra Regional Joint Cluster that takes in 10 local governments spanning the mountains, the sea and the tablelands, with the aim of sharing priorities and collaborating on major projects in the interests of delivering better outcomes for their communities. If the National Cabinet has proven one thing, it's what can be achieved across borders when there is a shared goal and the requisite will. Today, we set a challenge for the government. Get the design and the delivery of the regional deals right. And once you've done this, chart a course for a multi-million-dollar investment in the delivery of 20 deals by 2030. We're not in the business of picking winners, but regions that come to my mind are the Midwest or goldfields in the West, the Limestone Coast in South Australia, Victoria's Mallee, the Riverina of New South Wales, my own Liverpool Plains region, the Darling Downs and the magnificent Central Queensland. A focus on a renaissance of regional manufacturing must form part of regionalisation, regional deals and the government's plan for recovery. COVID-19 brought into sharp focus the risk of our reliance on goods produced overseas, whether it's face masks, ventilators or crop protection products and other farm inputs. For a long time now, the business case for value adding and processing at home here has been a really tough one. Late last month, multinational New Farm announced the closure of its fungicides and insecticides manufacturing plant in Laverton, struggling with the cost of energy and labour, amongst other factors. Their herbicide operations are also under an enormous threat. Here is an example of what will continue to happen if we don't take steps to allow businesses to remain competitive. Manufacturing assets commissioned decades ago need updating. These assets produce products that go to the heart of our ability to produce food and fibre here in Australia. Modern plants are more energy efficient, higher yielding and automated. Capital investment is required to keep these assets in Australia. To get this right, business needs incentives and support to combat unfair and targeted competition from overseas manufacturers and remain in Australia long term. Make no mistake, this is not about subsidies and not about protectionism, but it is about a genuine partnership between all levels of government and business to strengthen our supply chain, to build communities and to grow the economy in a competitive and market-driven approach. Many Australian-owned, regionally based food processing plants are using out-of-date technology that is labour, water and energy intensive. The tide is changing, but slowly. New automated technologies and smarter approaches to energy are emerging. But an injection of public and private capital to fund the adoption of advanced technology is needed to put viable large-scale manufacturing within reach of many. This is especially true of the energy sector, where plans for technology and innovation need to not only be developed, but also to be implemented. True to the entrepreneurial spirit of our farmers, many are already dipping their toe in the water, and some have jumped right on in. Like Natural Evolution Foods in North Queensland, where dynamic banana growers Krista and Rob Watkins were fed up with the wastage of out-of-spec fruit. Krista's idea to turn green bananas into flour for baking and powder for smoothies has put their value-added products on the shelves of Woolworths, and through their online platform, Natural Evolution now has customers across the world. The Watkins took a leap of faith and installed the world's first and only pharmaceutical-grade banana flour plant on their farm, right alongside where the bananas are grown. They've since added banana ointment to their product range and are turning what would be other wasted products, such as broccoli, into flour. They also distill sweet potato vodka and employ 10 locals. We need much more of this. With the COVID-19 hospitality shutdowns, the Watkins were contacted by growers from across Australia, looking for a new purpose for their surplus produce. And how about Little Big Dairy in Dubbo, where the Chesworth family's Holstein cows produce 8 million litres of milk each year. This single-source milk is processed and bottled on farm and shipped to supermarkets, cafes, and even direct to homes across New South Wales and ACT. I love it when the coffee in my Canberra office is made on Little Big Milk, and I always think of Erica and her family. Just last week, one of our corporate partners, Coles, provided a business acceleration grant to Albury-based business Plastic Forest, who produce fence posts from, of all things, silage wrap and other agricultural plastic waste. These fence posts are now forming part of the bushfire recovery effort. There's great potential for smart regional specialisation and a dynamic future for an Australian agri-food industry based on value adding. Government across all tiers can play a key role in creating more favourable conditions for this investment. The resilience and self-sufficiency of the agri-food sector hinges on taking a whole-of-system approach. Suppliers of inputs, freight providers, growers and processors, all working together with government to chart the way forward. A properly resourced plan to improve the competitive environment for local manufacturers, particularly in regional Australia, must form part of our COVID recovery. Another key area of concern in the ag sector and rural and regional Australia is labour availability. Research shows that more than 40% of farmers experience labour shortages during peak times such as harvest. COVID-19 has highlighted the angst for growers, many who depend on foreign workers, and in particular backpackers, to get the job done. The complexity of the Australian industrial relations system is one of the chief reasons that the cost of labour for Australian farmers is amongst the highest in the world. Wages account for more than 60% of our total production costs. Farmers and farm workers need an industrial relations system which is both fair and easy to implement. And the NFF is pleased to be part of one of 5 working groups led by the Attorney-General, designed to streamline and simplify Australia's IR systems. The impact of IR reform as a COVID-19 economic stimulus can't be underestimated, and what farmers are demanding of government today is the simplifying and streamlining of Australia's industrial relations system. The disruption to our economy must be seen as a chance to drive reform and allow business to be competitive on the global stage. The link to a global stage is critical for agriculture. As a sector that is and always will be reliant on global demand for our food and fibre, we remain proud that Australia's commodity exports helped stave off a recession during the global financial crisis. So too will our exports be key to Australia's COVID-19 recovery. As an industry that exports 70% of what we produce, material growth in agriculture will always require an expansion of international trade. COVID-19 has presented challenges borne by geopolitics and the plain logistics of getting produce to market. More than $389 million is estimated to have been wiped off the bottom line of our luxury seafood exports to China in the opening weeks of the pandemic, and the recently burgeoning wool market is today at a 3-year low. During such uncertain times, it's normal to look inward and protect those things closest to us, but this can't be confused with and shouldn't morph into protectionism. We must remain a strong global citizen and at the same time grow our international relationships with China and our other trading partners and countries to overcome inevitable differences that occur in the geopolitical arena. We're looking forward to realising the fruits of the newly minted Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, quite a mouthful. And just last month, farmers welcomed the beginning of negotiations towards a UK-Australia FTA, and in particular, Minister Birmingham singling out of agriculture as a key priority. We expect government to pursue an ambitious EU-Australia trade deal that provides meaningful access for Australian agricultural products and ideally on a level playing field. Farmers manage 51% of the Australian landscape. Every day we create positive environmental outcomes on behalf of all Australians. But for too long, draconian and complex environmental regulation has shackled farm businesses. Farmers tell us, as does the Craik review of the EPBC Act, that there needs to be a transformation of the interaction between food and fibre production and biodiversity management. The NFF wants to see farmers financially rewarded and incentivised for best practice stewardship. Dr Wendy Craik recommended that $1 billion fund would be a good start. Australian farmers are already leading the world in reducing carbon emissions. Our red meat sector, for example, has a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. To measure agriculture's impact and that of other industries, we call on the government to be inclusive and transparent with the data used to set national emissions reduction targets. And we need better baseline information on climate change. Our $100 billion roadmap seeks industry trajectories by 2025. We have an aspiration to be trending towards carbon neutrality by 2030 and are working with a range of research providers to coordinate a synthesised set of methodologies for all sectors to help achieve this. Agriculture is truly part of the solution, and NFF is committed to representing farmers in this debate. Let me move to another contentious issue farmers are dealing with. More than half of Australia's irrigated agriculture is in the Murray-Darling Basin. And right now, farmers and communities up and down the basin are hurting. Hurt that is perpetuated at the moment by a lack of leadership from basin governments. My message here today is clear and it's strong. Ministers need to put politics aside, stop stalling, and implement the swathe of recommended changes to ensure the plan delivers for farmers, for communities, and for the environment. The monumental failure to date shows contempt for the people whose livelihoods depend on a healthy river system and a high-functioning plan. I simply can't stand here and talk about growing rural and regional Australia while sitting by and watching families, businesses and communities be torn apart by government inaction and parochialism. Enough is enough. No more reports, no more inquiries. Government needs to stop pointing the fingers at each other and instead focus on fixing the Murray-Darling Basin plan. Ladies and gentlemen, farmers are experts at working from home. We've been getting on with the job, producing the food Australians rely on, keeping more and more regional Aussies in jobs, and batting above our average in terms of economic contribution. We're no stranger to digging in late in the innings when the chips are down. But to continue the cricket analogy, we're not content to be the night watchman. We don't need permission to hit it out of the park, but we do need the right policy settings and private and public investments to help us do it. The Get Australia Going document outlines the farm sector's plan for an accelerated recovery. These opportunities have been chosen for their capacity to provide a rapid boost to a farm sector recovering from drought, fires and flood, as well as the impacts of COVID-19. Australia is truly the envy of the world in how we managed the COVID-19 health crisis, and we're well placed to lead the world in the economic recovery also. And the recovery, we believe, must start in the bush. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for your speech, Fiona. The mini-budget is being handed down next week and the full budget is coming in October. How hopeful are you that the government will deliver some sort of R&D benefit to help rural communities with this renaissance that you hope happens as a result of the recovery from COVID-19?
Yeah, well, I think certainly they need to start being strategic about what they do with their budgetary fixes. And we're hopeful, even though some of this is new thinking, some of it is not. It's been around for a very long time. And if we have a look at a combination, I think it's not just financial support, it's also an investment. It's also about putting some of those policy levers in place. So we know that the COVID Commission in particular is advising government on things that are ready to do right now. So what we say is that our report covers some of the things that you could do immediately in terms of policy levers. Some of them have been on the table since 2017 when the Productivity Commission, for example, highlighted a number of the things that were holding our industry back. But also I think when we're looking at regionalisation, the Regional Deals program has been out there since 2018. It's delivered, I think, 2.5 deals so far. And really, you know, by committing to a strategic framework that is going to bring the three tiers of government together, by committing some dollars to that growth, we know that every dollar brings at least 2 more back to Australia. So we hope that the government might start to look at that, even as they are still being asked, of course, for recovery dollars for COVID. We have to have an eye to recovery. Agriculture is performing so well. Now is the time to start committing some funds to the growth and to keep working at that.
Lucy Barber.
Lucy Barber from the ABC. Fiona, thank you very much for your speech. Governments can create favourable conditions for manufacturing and processing in rural and regional areas like you're advocating for, but what exactly are you specifically wanting? You said subsidies aren't an option. That's not what you're calling for. What are you talking about? Tax breaks, that sort of thing? And also, when you say you want a simplified IR system for farmers, does that simply mean paying workers less?
No, it certainly doesn't, so I'll do the last one first. So what it means, it's about being flexible. What are the jobs of the future? What are we going to look like when we start actually value-adding more food here? When we take, for example, Krista and Rob Watkins and what they're doing, nobody would have envisaged that 10 years ago. Yet here they are creating this fantastic business up in North Queensland. But the needs of that business are changing. They're quite different to the needs of that business 10 years ago. So we need a flexible workforce that's actually able to cater for the changing demands of our industry, and it's about flexible workers to go with that. So we've obviously been really dependent on a lot of workers coming in from overseas to do some of our jobs, and those workers are not here anymore. But we know the demand for people to be engaged and involved in our industry at the moment is really high, and we welcome that. There is a buzz about our industry. There are people wanting to be involved in our industry, and I think it's critical that we keep moving forward in terms of being agile and actually being flexible about how we attract those workers, whether they're Australians or whether they're people coming in from overseas. Whatever you want to do at the moment, whatever your interest, there's a job for you in agriculture. In terms of the manufacturing and processing, there are some critical things that some of these businesses, like Little Big Dairy, like the Watkins in North Queensland, are struggling against at the moment. For example, connectivity is one of those things. So we talk about being able to be digitally enabled, and we know the benefits that are going to be unlocked if we can actually unlock that digital connectivity right across Australia. But there are still many, many people, many businesses that are actually struggling with getting reliable digital connectivity on a daily basis. Now with the changing technologies, we should be able to address some of those things. Likewise, I think incentives. We're looking for government to provide frameworks that give some certainty, whether it's in the energy sector, whether it's in the connectivity sector, whether it's about giving some support for infrastructure to upgrade infrastructure. We need the right environment for public and private money to come together. I know here at the Press Club, the Business Council has spoken about the need to start looking at regionalisation. What we need is the sorts of framework that can actually encourage and give certainty to public and private investment to actually fund some of those new developments as we go and build our industry.
When you talk about you need to be flexible on IR, exactly what do you mean? Because the unions will worry that that means less pay, lower penalty rates. What do you mean when you say there needs to be more flexibility?
Well, I think we need to be, right at the moment, we actually have a number of different visas that people come in and work on Australian farms. And they're actually quite hard about how they work. They're very, very controlled. They're very set. Each visa is different. The employers, for example, have to actually prove for each visa, it's a different requirement as to whether they're a certified employer. So we know that if we're harvesting, for example, a wheat crop in the middle of a paddock where it could be with an imminent thunderstorm, then we might need people to be able to work those extra hours to actually get that job done. And be flexible enough to do that in terms of labour. But we also know that sometimes it's about digital, so it's about flexibility in terms of what skills they bring to the jobs. It's not necessarily now as labour intensive as it was. Now it can be about operating $1 million machines and driving highly automated programs that can drive some of the automated facilities in facilities as well. So we don't really know about the sorts of workforce that we're looking for now in agriculture. We know it's going to be diverse. We know it's going to be right across Australia, so we're going to need that sort of flexibility to bring workers right across Australia wherever they're needed. And we're going to need to be agile as we look at delivering goods to the different markets that we have now. So if we just stop focusing on, for example, growing a bulk commodity, which is what agriculture's been doing over many generations, we've focused on growing, say, wheat because we grow wheat. But in actual fact, or vegetables because we grow vegetables. But what if we start turning those vegetables into a heat and eat meal, for example? And instead of just, sending those vegetables off in a raw state to the consumers in the cities, we might actually start value-adding them here and sending them off as a heat and eat meal overseas. And we might be able to do that from the regions. Now, that is going to require a whole different skill set to the skill set of some of the workers that we have currently now. And we need to be able to be agile, to be able to actually attract those workers and then work, make sure that they've got the right conditions at the time that we work with. We want to work with the unions on this. This is not, this is a future-focused program. This is not a thinking of the past where, people were about exploiting workers. This is about looking at, at implementing a future-faced workforce.
Mike Foley.
Thanks for your speech, Fiona. You mentioned in it draconian environmental regulations. The CSIRO has identified land clearing as the primary threat to Australia's biodiversity, and I'm just wondering if you think agriculture can continue to be sustainable or can be sustainable while physically expanding, increasing its footprint within the continent. And also, when you talk about reducing regulations, how do you separate out environmental regulations that, for example, protect farmland from coal? One example, the Shenhua mine, its last approval decision sits with the federal government water trigger. How do you separate those regulations out from the regulations that also just control farmland, land clearing?
I think, so the first one is, I think we need to be really careful about the discussion about land clearing, because the statistics and the way that we actually collect that data at the moment is a very blunt tool and a very blunt measure. So it measures every bit of whether it's woody weeds, whether it's mulga for drought fodder, whatever it is that may be removed, it measures it. And it then determines that it's land clearing by farmers and therefore it's bad. What it doesn't take into account, first of all, is how many trees or other vegetation is planted or improved, and the environmental benefits that might actually accrue from that. So it's just too simplistic to say that every tree is good and if it's removed it's bad. It just doesn't work like that. And certainly I think farmers are in the business of actually managing landscapes for a very long time. It's not about, I think some of our regulation and our legislation is actually predicated on a development that, whether you're approving a town, structure, whether you're approving a mine or whether you're improving actually a piece of infrastructure. Farmers really are not about development in that sense at all. We are about working with the environment to grow food and fibre. We're about actively managing a landscape. And I think as we turn around and think about how farmers do that, It's a lot of the farmers now, they're measuring carbon in their soils, they're measuring biodiversity. Their aims are to increase and improve biodiversity. They've got the figures to back that up. So we have to stop this whole rhetoric of, just let's keep bashing up farmers because the land clearing figures say that they're doing a bad job, because I don't think they are. I think they're doing an excellent job. And if we turn the whole framework on its head and look at actually something that Wendy Craik recommended, the $1 billion biodiversity fund, in actual fact, we'll start getting not only, recognising the value of some of the things that farmers do on farm while we're managing the landscape, some of the really positive environmental benefits, but it will be the carrot rather than stick. And instead of this heavy-handed sort of regulation that's been built on what the worst one farmer might do, it's more risk-based. It's looking at what farmers are doing generally across the landscape, and what we know is that overwhelming they're getting great environmental outcomes. We grow some of the best food and fibre in the world. We have some of the best biodiversity in the world, and I think that's actually being shown. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think natural resources are a lot of them are unique. Things like the water trigger, for example, and they do demand, we know that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan demands a federal focus, and it's notified that it's a resource that goes across different jurisdictions. I think we need to have the same focus on water, and also, of course, valuable agricultural land as well. It's a finite resource. We're not going to get any back again, and so we do need to make sure that our planning and policy settings give some certainty for some of that.
Just a friendly reminder, could journalists please restate the organisation too that they're working with for the benefit of the audience? Richard Ferguson.
Richard Ferguson from The Australian. Thank you so much for your speech, Ms Simpson. How big an obstacle is the deteriorating relationship with China to farmers working towards a recovery, and what can be done to fix that relationship?
It's very difficult at the moment. Obviously, we're in a lockdown situation. Normally, I think when there were any misunderstandings at all, government would actually just jump on a plane and go over and start having some of those face-to-face interactions that can sometimes mend some of these rifts that occur. But government is dealing with a really intense geopolitical situation at the moment where they have to put forward the views of Australians. And so they are walking a really tight rope. And it's really difficult for them. I have sympathy for government in terms of how they're dealing with this, because it's really a vexed situation. But by the same token, they are one of our biggest markets, not just for agriculture, but for many other industries as well. And whilst in agriculture now, we certainly have an eye to the fact that in some of our commodities, we may well be uncomfortably exposed. That's why it's important to keep developing the other markets. We are also making sure that we can keep those relationships going at an industry level, at a commodity level, reach out to our counterparts in those different countries like China and make sure that we can keep having those conversations, because there's no doubt that our produce is still highly sought after by the Chinese population and that it's highly in demand. So we really badly need the government to make sure that whilst they're dealing with some of these tricky geopolitical things, that's their job, their government, by the same token they do understand that how important this market is to us and can deal with the relationship issues that arise as they do, whilst maintaining the other important relationships.
How worried are you that the relationship will enter the deep freeze even further, given the warnings today from China about people coming here for any purpose whatsoever? You talked about exposure to commodities. I mean, how bad could things get?
It is worrying. It's very worrying. And as we see what happened with barley, for example, and beef quite recently, and some of the language that's coming out of China now, it is worrying. And I think, as I said, there are some commodities that are, I would say, uncomfortably exposed. But for many other commodities, they had a wake-up call back in the 70s when the UK joined the EU. And we had really all our trade eggs in the one basket with the UK. And so I think now there are many that have a diversified market, and they're looking at making sure that they can keep those relationships strong in some of the more stable markets in Asia, and look at developing markets too in Indonesia, Hong Kong, and even with an eye to the UK and EU. And of course, India is a whole unexplored market too. So look, who knows? What I think is we shouldn't make it more dramatic than it is. It's difficult. China is a very different country to Australia. They have a completely different political system, completely different forces at play. It's important for the government to stand up for the rights of Australians as well. So they have a difficult job to do, but we do absolutely rely on the government to, at the end of the day, keep that relationship as strong as it can be, despite their need to actually deal with some of these geopolitical factors.
Kath Sullivan.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks to the Press Club for today. Kath Sullivan from the ABC. I wanted to ask you about class actions. The government has proposed changes to the way that class actions could potentially be funded, and opponents of these changes suggest that that could prohibit average Australians from presenting class actions, or even the National Farmers Federation Farmers Fighting Fund. Of course, you had a big win with that not so long ago with the appeal over the live export decision. Are you concerned that this might actually prevent appeals such as the one you had a win with over Joe Ludwig's decision from taking place? And could you also update on where you expect that court ruling to sit with the government?
Yeah, well, certainly we're still waiting. The clock is ticking towards the deadline for an appeal from government. We are in terms of appealing against our case. We hope that government doesn't appeal. Really, this has been 9 long years of pain. The AFFF certainly established the fact that it was illegal, not only immoral but illegal, for a minister to make the sort of decision that Joe Ludwig did. And we hope that government in no way supports a minister's right to make that decision ever again.
So if it paid the compensation but appealed the legal ruling, that wouldn't satisfy you? Well,
we have said to government that we will obviously, on behalf of the litigants, look at anything that is put on the table, and we absolutely have to do that. The litigants have suffered terribly over a long time, and compensation will go some way to helping that. But the other thing is, it's about the vibe. It's about the precedent that's been set here, and it's about the right of ministers to make the sort of decision that Joe Ludwig made, that Tony Abbott has said and that others have said has been the worst decision ever made by an Australian government. So we don't want that ever to happen again. And we have strongly said to government that whilst compensation, of course, is something to look at, and we will examine any offer on the table, and we would have to do that on behalf of the litigants and their interests, we still really hope they don't appeal. In terms of the legislation before government at the moment, we are taking some legal advice on that. We are a little bit concerned that the AFFF, which is not, as you know, a mass class action funder generally. They're taking a very small amount of support for this particular case. We don't do it as a matter of course. It's not our everyday business, class actions, but we reserve the right to try and help farmers when there's a precedent to be established. So we're worried that we would be caught up in that, and we just wanted to get some clarity around that actual that sort of legislation and where it would leave us, and we'll be making a decision in coming days. And obviously we're talking to the Treasurer, talking to the Treasurer's office about our concerns right now, and so we hope we might be able to work through those issues.
Gauge the vibe.
The vibe, it's very important.
Tim Shaw.
Thanks, Sabra. Fiona, Tim Shaw, National Press Club of Australia Director. Thanks so much for your address today. Can you give us a snapshot on the number of farmers that are receiving JobKeeper at the moment?
Actually, I can't, Tim. I'm sorry. I have no idea about those figures.
Interested in the sentiments of small family businesses about if JobKeeper was to stop in September, what kind of financial impacts that would have. But importantly, what are the banks saying to farmers? We've seen a lot of relief on loan repayments for very many Australians. What are the banks saying to farmers? Are they watching their cash flows very, very carefully? Have most Australian small farming businesses received bank relief on their loans?
Yeah, look, as far as I'm aware, at the moment there has been no issues with the banks whatsoever. The banks have all worked very well with their clients, not only to support them through the drought and through this current crisis, but also to make sure that they have enough funds to keep going and to keep actually being able to operate now that we've had a change in seasonal circumstances. The Treasurer, actually, one of the best things that came out of the drought was a roundtable where we sit with the banks and talk quite Chatham House rules about some of the things that have have been, issues in the past. And I think that's sort of an open forum to have that sort of a conversation has been really, really helpful. And certainly in terms of understanding the situation that the banks are facing and the banks understanding, more importantly, the issues that some of my members are facing and where those issues are, I think has been helpful. So no issues at the moment, and I actually think the banks have been very helpful in making sure that people have some certainty about their funds, where those funds are going to come from and their ability to be refinanced. Thanks, Tim, for the question.
Just on the Chatham House rules idea, just on the roundtables that are happening under the Attorney General's watch, and I'm not expecting you to divulge any secrets, but can you characterise how those meetings are happening? Are there full and forthright discussions that are happening?
Well, I can actually say I haven't been to one yet, so I don't know.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I actually can't divulge that, so that's a good thing. So you're not getting me on the hop at all there, Sabra.
Excellent. And there are many industries that will undergo structural change through what we're seeing with the COVID-19 shutdowns. And given that you're talking big about this idea that regional and rural Australia can help with this recovery from COVID, should there be sort of any incentives offered to city slickers and families to go out bush to reskill and to help with this revival?
Yeah, look, I think that's always, anything like that is welcome on the table, but I also think there needs to be a bigger plan. There needs to be a bigger plan and incentivisation for big business to also do the same thing. At the moment we have processing plants here in the cities that are probably taking up very valuable land that employ lots of people and could well benefit from moving to a region where they could also take jobs and be part of that community. So I think any incentives to encourage people to move, and from the figures I gave earlier, that people are taking that opportunity up with or without incentive, just by the tree change opportunity, by the cheaper land prices, but they also may need some incentives from government to do that, and we're very supportive of anything that gives people the opportunity to have another look at regional Australia and see the benefits of living there.
Pablo Vinales.
Pablo Vinales from SBS News. Thank you very much for your speech. Just further on the previous question, you've spoken about the accelerated recovery. Where does Job Seeker come into that, and how critical do you think those unemployment payments are going to be on that road to recovery in rural and regional areas?
Yeah, look, I know Job Seeker has been an important part of the recovery for a lot of rural and regional communities. I also know that in agriculture we have a lot of job vacancies, and some of those vacancies perhaps are not filled by people who are receiving the increased Job Seeker amount. A lot of our jobs, and it just highlights for us the issue that we have, where a lot of jobs at the moment have been fulfilled by overseas workers and backpackers and other people who come to Australia and don't mind going to the north of Australia or the middle of Australia or Western Queensland or wherever it is. So, I think it is an important, Job Seeker and Job Keeper for that matter, have been very important programs in the bush. And I think, the government's to be commended for their introduction. But the future of them will be very interesting to see.
So do you think they need to go beyond September?
I won't comment on that at the moment. I think at the moment the government needs to do its sums. We would also like to make sure that they can keep investing in in looking with an eye to recovery as well. And some of the things that we're talking about today, we'd like to include that. We know it's not a bottomless pit. At some point people are going to have to pay for some of these initiatives. So we do make sure, we want to make sure that government has as much information as it possibly can have. At the moment, I think the opportunities for our industry are around growth, rather than particularly Job Seeker and Job Keeper, despite some of the support that it's given in the past and some of the support that it may give to some of the businesses in rural and regional New South Wales. Overwhelmingly, I have to say that a lot of the businesses who came through the drought are actually now, making their own money and starting to pay back some of that debt themselves, and they would probably welcome more spending in investment in infrastructure to enable them to increase their competitiveness and increase their ability in the region to be this regional hub rather than necessarily that. So it's a mixed bag.
Jane Norman.
Hi Fiona, Jane Norman from ABC News. Very nice to see you again. My question's about the US-China trade deal. Labor has raised concerns that this deal could come at the expense of Australian farmers, and we know that in light of the recent trade spat between China and Australia with barley and beef farmers, it's the US that could ultimately benefit from that. So are you concerned about this deal, and should the Morrison government be picking up the phone to their US counterparts to raise some concerns that we're getting squeezed by it?
Well, I mean, we always hope that the Australian government's picking up the phone and talking to people about these things, and I'm sure that they are. I'm sure Minister Birmingham is. But it has been a concern of ours for a while that the US, it seems weird, doesn't it, that after all the things that Mr Trump says about Xi Jinping, that they could be striking some favourable deal. But anyway, that's the way of the world. And it has actually been a concern for us for some time that they could be getting, that the US farmers could be getting favourable treatment, and that we are not. We are in favour of level playing fields. We are in favour of the WTO. We absolutely urge the government to make sure that all of those things are addressed through the proper processes. And at the moment, you know, it's all a bit hearsay. We don't quite know exactly where they're going to land, but certainly we support a level playing field. We support, you know, making sure that everybody can have. The ideal environment would be one in which we could just all compete on competitiveness, and we support our local manufacturing industry, our local production industry to be as strong, competitive and viable as we possibly can, and then everybody compete on the same terms. Now, if that's not happening, then it would be nice, you know, and in fact we need to make sure that we make that clear to the Americans.
Nick Stewart.
Thanks for a terrific speech, even if it did sound almost exactly the same as the one you gave 2 years ago.
Oh.
I just new updated examples, but otherwise it's really two stories. We have a COVID crisis. Immediately you get the National Cabinet working together. People actually, the entire country has been united to fight COVID. Then you've got the drought, the environment, all the other problems that you're talking about, the fires that we had earlier this year. And we see absolutely no advance on this. Instead, we mire down in fighting, infighting as well. Even the farmers' supposed party, the National Party, can't even manage to get their act together and get more than one person nominating for Eden Monero and end up not getting anything.
Nick,
I mean,
is there
how
a question
is it?
coming? Sorry.
How is it that you can come, and when is the NFF actually going to stand up and demand some action for Australia?
Well, thanks, Nick, for the question. So just to be clear, we have no party other than farmers. So we don't support any particular party. We are very apolitical, and that's a really important part of what we do. We are demanding action. This is what we're demanding now. Some of these policies have been on the table since 2017. The Productivity Commission made a huge range of recommendations. None of them have been taken up. So we have to be strong about this. We have been, you know, we are only advocates. We are not political parties. We are not political operatives. We are actually advocates. So all we can do is advocate as strongly as we possibly can, bring all the farmers, you know, with us, and make sure that we can keep pushing for what is important to us. And that's what we're doing. So we set the chart, we charted the course back in 2018, and I'm pleased that you see some similarities between my speech then and what I've delivered today, because in actual fact, hopefully we're not just picking tangents out of the air. Hopefully we are delivering a strategic course on strategic aims and strategic goals, and those things flow through. So certainly that's what I've been trying to deliver today. We are asking, you know, we really are pushing now government to actually for some action on some of these things. Thank you.
Michael Keating.
Michael Keating from Keating Media, Fiona. I was recently on a farm in Cowra in regional New South Wales, helping a farmer set up and work his NBN connection. That connection was inadequate to stream even the latest shows on Netflix, let alone run complicated machinery or sensors that might be needed for agricultural production. Do the regions have the services they need in health, mental health and communications that will be needed to lead this economic recovery?
I think so. Connectivity is but one thing that we need, and we need more of and we need better of across the regions. I think, and when we're talking about connected regional hubs and regional deals, definitely a part of that is a strong business centre, a strong health centre, a strong centre of education. And then also, of course, we see that there's a part of agriculture and food processing and manufacturing as part of that as well. But without connectivity, I don't think not all the regions do have access to strong connectivity. We know that. Not all the regions and not all the people in Australia have access to what we would consider as an acceptable level of connectivity. So we absolutely need that. Likewise, it's the same with health and education. We do need to keep attracting people. We've got some amazing facilities in the regions now, but we also need to make sure we've got people in those facilities. We need to make sure we've got the appropriate skilled staff. We need to keep attracting doctors and health workers, and likewise education facilities. We have some fantastic situations, but we also have some we could do better. And without having this overarching strategic framework that we're envisaging through our regional deals program, where you look at all of those factors, where you look at health, education, business, infrastructure, connectivity, and also cultural things. A region is not just, conjoined roads joining everybody together. It's actually about cultural facilities and Indigenous culture as well. So we need to actually have some sort of a plan where we can actually bring all those things together and strategically build those resources in the bush. Telehealth has been excellent, but it doesn't actually replace face-to-face doctors or face-to-face medical facilities. And I think we're having ourselves on if we think that it does. We believe in strong, vibrant regions. Some of them, we see that it's starting to happen, but we need to do it better and we need to do it more, and we need an overarching strategic framework to actually make that happen.
Fiona, you've pointed out that the National Farmers Federation is apolitical, but have you ever been tapped to join one of the major political parties or thought about a political career up the hill?
Yeah, look, I think I'd be, in my position, people often think that I am the next person, that must be my next job, but in actual fact it's not, so I'm not considering it, and I like the job that I've got, and I particularly like my day job, which is being a farmer, and so no.
And given the restrictions with travel that we've had in COVID-19 and the booming of Zoom conferences and whatever else, what has been the biggest surprise to you in these COVID times?
I think the biggest surprise to pretty much everybody is that our connectivity, despite the fact it is not perfect across Australia and there is still quite a lot of work to do in some of our communities and for some of our businesses, it's held up. So we have been able to have Zoom teleconferences where we've had 400 people dial in, where we've had 1,500 people dial in, where we've been able to have effective board meetings and short, sharp board meetings at NFF now, 3-hour board meetings. We don't go that whole day and a half thing. So we are shorter and sharper. We are better at what we do. And the digital systems that we have had, we've been able to run our businesses. And I think that's the other reason, Sabra, why this is such a great program for now, because how good is it that you can do all your work on your farm, you can be as productive, you can attend every board meeting that you can, and then you can still go out there and you can be with your family, you can cook, you can do the things that you want to do on your farm. And so what a great lifestyle is that. So I think that to me is the biggest surprise. Businesses must be saving so much money. Yet they are not actually losing too much by not having everybody coming in face-to-face all the time.
Short, sharp board meetings, I like that too. Thank you. Everybody, please join me in thanking Fiona Simson.